Well, I'm interested in both the sea people of, the late Hittite and era, and also the Armada, the Spanish Armada. And I wonder if it's something to do with my background of always living on islands. I'm living in New Zealand now, and of course it was first explored by sea people. Quite capable sea people, whalers and so on. And in England, of course, it's known for its historic navy, as with the Armada success and so on, against the Armada, Spanish Armada. And its naval strength during the First and Second World Wars of the 20th century. And the ocean is an incredible hedge against famine, isn't it? If the crops fail, you've still got the sea. If we can go to sea and fish, we still have food. We will survive. So the sea has remained incredibly significant for those communities that have a coast. They're a bit vulnerable from the point of view of enemies can travel to you rather quickly and easily. To defend yourself from the seaside, you need a good navy, so you're encouraged to build a naval force of some sort. And sea can be incredibly significant, can't it? And of course in negative ways too. I mean, tsunamis and sea levels can be of paramount importance to you. I used to have a house on the seafront, Walton-on-the-Naze in north of Essex, and I realised, it dawned on me, this was not a good place to have a house. We're on a sand spit, in fact. Fancy having a house built on the sand. And the sea level was, at high tide, not much lower than my front doorstep, which was not very high. It did dawn on me that this wasn't the best ideal place to live in some ways, although I did love it, of course, being on the seafront. And God uses these transitory states to great blessing to us. I used to have long walks on the Naze, which lead down to salt marshes as you go further out on the Naze. A Naze is a sort of long spit of land, mud and salt marsh, but I suppose basically sand dunes or something underneath, or a lot of sand anyway. There was heavy erosion of the cliffs on the nearer part of the Naze, where you could find shark's teeth and fossils and things, as the cliffs eroded by the action of the sea down below. Nice place to live. I mean, everything's temporary. I'm not there now. Oh, nice place to live where I am now. I'm on the edge of, not quite on the edge, but just over the edge, so you can't see the water too well. I can see a bit of the lake from where I am, Hamilton Lake in New Zealand, North Island. And it's a small lake, a tiny lake, of course. You can walk around it, it's 4 kilometres round. And it's actually a caldera. In other words, it's some upthrust of volcanic activity in the distant past, and it sinks back, and you get a sort of bit of a puddle in the middle. This nice little lake, and a ridge, not all the way, not complete round it. On the railway side, it's flat. The railway isn't much higher than the level of the lake. But on the other side, the town side, there's a high ridge, which the house I rent is also on, and like the water towers further round on this ridge. You go round clockwise from me, about say a third of the clock, a fifth of the clock round, and yeah. So I'm no longer looking out on the North Sea. I'm near this tiny lake. Yeah. But of course the whole point of being a creature is that we are mobile. And to some limited extent, but we can choose our location, our environment, from what's available to choose, of course. The Dead Sea people were, the Black Sea people were choosing from the point of view of necessity, probably, of the confinement of rising water. I don't know, but it's an interesting theory, isn't it? We reason from what we've experienced and what we know. And the Jesus story gives us basic points to remember and to think from. So if we consider God as our dad, we have a different religion to being dominated by seeing God as our, in our situation, say, of Israel, which was constantly at risk of the neighbouring people on land, whether they were Canaanites or whatever they were. And they form a God and a religion appropriate to this experience. But if we withdraw and consider our experience just from our childhood personally, and it is after all a personal religion we may be looking for, to feel truly valid to us, a God that we can love, then we come up with a theory, a view, a foundation that God is our dad, benevolent, a good parent, keeps us protected, yes, also loves us, cares for us, we matter to him, and we start to reason our religion accordingly. And that's what we should have done, ideally, with the Jesus story. I think it was greatly influenced by the previous story, which was of people that had travelled down to Egypt and come back again, and basically people who had originally invaded a hostile land of Canaanites. I mean, in all probability, most of the Jewish people are Canaanite, but I mean, that's not the point. The story they had was one of coming from Ur of the Chaldees, Abraham, and so on. And that story, combined with the Jesus story, which really in many ways is Greek, it's the eternal, mystery cult application to the Hebrew culture, But the Hebrew culture, of course, affects the story, just as Catholicism is greatly affected by the local cultures of South America in those localities. You know, the Catholicism of South America is noticeably different to Catholicism of Italy and Europe. And Christianity is not a pure Jesus story revelation. It's combined with the revelation of the people as they were before the Jesus story, which was Canaanite, really, but, you know, sacrificing his son, for goodness sake. That's unquestionably, even the Bible's point of view, seen as Canaanite. But it was that sort of religion that was modifying the understanding of the Jesus story, greatly modifying it, so that it in some ways looks more Old Testament than Jesus' story. And you could say the rest of the New Testament is that bridge where you've got St. Paul justifying everything in terms of the Hebrew story, not in terms of the Jesus teaching, which he may not have had, of course. Gospels weren't written when Paul was writing his letters. If they were, it doesn't look as though Paul had much access to it, because he never quotes anything of Jesus. I say never, but I mean, all we've really got of Paul knowing of Jesus is on the night he was betrayed, the communion service. And you're not sure whether that isn't dropped in. I mean, one's not as assured of the consistency and validity and the unchanging nature of Scripture as the religious adherents so often exhibit. You know, the believer utterly believes in his Scripture. The onlooker thinks, not sure about that, looks a bit dodgy. So, whatever the revelation is, it's given to or dropped into an existing culture and belief system, which greatly affects and modifies whatever the revelation is. So, you know, Islam seemed in the early days an incredibly warring people, and the Hebrew people were too. They seem to be victims later on, in that they're eternally a buffer state between major world powers in history, or historicity anyway, whereas originally they were this great conquering nation by the power of God, becoming a nation, whatever. So we can find the religion of a people becomes unsuited to the situation they find they have with the evolving of time, the passing of time, as they evolve into a quite different situation. And it calls forth a new enlightenment, revelation of Jesus in the Jesus story. But the degree to which that revelation affects the existing culture depends much on the nature of the existing culture and its influence on the new story. We, from our 21st, well, let's go further back, whatever our situation is as we go further back in our history in, say, Western Europe, we might find that that's not quite consistent with the revelation we've received as modified by what we were in the past. And so we seek adjustment, subtle adjustments that come along where kings start to lose their power and the church starts to lose its power to, say, parliament, some notions of Greek democracy which become in some ways more appropriate to this Mediterranean people at the time of the ancient Greeks, say. Or at our modern times, of relatively modern, of taking on ideas of democracy which might be more suitable revelation compared to an authoritarian system, which Christianity might still be, so that the church becomes an anachronism in its new location of Europe. And the religion has to adjust, and it does, but perhaps not fast enough. So you suddenly get some new revelation come along. I don't know, communism or humanism or secularism or even political correctness in some sense starts to be generated, which is distinct to the older culture. Its revelation. We're eternally changing, aren't we? You could say evolving. Some people feel degenerating, deteriorating. That we're not so much a modern culture, but a degenerate culture of the past. Depends how you see it, doesn't it? What your values are. You may be greatly impressed with the modern world, that it's, I don't know, wonderful and free and technologically so satisfying. Or you may be frightened to death by it, that we're going to blow ourselves up and there's a current crisis in everything, you know. I suspect the world's not actually in that sense much different to what it's always been. That man is always coping with, from time to time, major crises and difficulties and wants and scarcity and so on, and uncertainty. Yes, indeed. Well, thank you, Dad.